The relentless hum of the fluorescent lights above the Daily Grind diner was a familiar, almost comforting, drone. For Sarah Jenkins, 27 and perpetually on the verge of exhaustion, it was the soundtrack to her life. Each flicker and buzz echoed the relentless demands of her days, a monotonous rhythm that began before dawn and often stretched well past midnight. This particular Tuesday, the diner was quieter than usual, the morning rush having long since dissipated, leaving behind a scattering of stragglers nursing lukewarm coffee and lost in their own thoughts. The clink of cutlery against ceramic, the muted rustle of newspaper pages turning, it all contributed to the backdrop of Sarah's existence. Every sound, every movement, felt like another drain on her already depleted energy reserves. Sarah moved with a practiced grace born of years on her feet, her movements precise and economical. Her uniform, a faded blue apron over a crisp white shirt, bore the subtle stains of 1,000 spilled coffees. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a neat ponytail, had a few rebellious strands escaping, framing a face that, despite its weariness, still held a hint of youthful determination in her bright, observant eyes. Beneath the surface, behind the polite smiles and automatic questions of, "Can I get you anything else?" a quiet storm of worry brewed. Rent was overdue, a menacing red letter currently residing on her kitchen counter. Her ancient, rust-eaten sedan, affectionately nicknamed the Coffin by Mark, her grizzled co-worker, wheezed its last with alarming regularity. And then there was art school, a dream that felt increasingly like a cruel, distant memory from a lifetime ago. Tucked deep within her battered messenger bag lay her worn sketchbook. Its pages, thick with the ghost of charcoal smudges, held countless portraits of strangers. Each line, each shading, was a silent testament to a different life, a fervent wish for a reality where art, not survival, dictated her days. Just as Sarah was about to retreat to the sanctuary of the back kitchen for a fleeting moment of respite, the bell above the diner's entrance chimed. A man entered, and the shift in the room was palpable. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to ripple with a subtle sheen, a stark, almost jarring contrast to the usual denim-clad truck drivers and weary commuters who frequented the Daily Grind. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, made hardly a sound on the scuffed linoleum floor. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority, his gaze distant, as if he were seeing something far beyond the chipped formica counters and faded booths. He chose a booth by the window, the furthest one from the counter, almost as if he sought anonymity. Sarah, ever the professional, pushed down a prickle of something akin to curiosity, mixed with a vague unease. She straightened her apron, took a deep breath, and approached him, her clipboard held firmly in her hand, a practiced, almost automatic smile already etched on her lips. "Welcome to the Daily Grind," she began, her voice a little brighter than she felt. "What can I get for you today?" He met her gaze for a brief moment, his eyes a startling shade of blue, then looked away, out the window at the drizzling rain. His voice was low, smooth, almost a whisper. "Just black coffee, please. And toast." "Right." His order was simple, almost too simple for a man who looked like he belonged in a high-rise office building, not a greasy spoon diner. Throughout his meal, he barely touched his food. The coffee sat largely untouched, a steaming sentinel beside his plate of cold toast. His eyes, those striking blue eyes, constantly scanned the diner, but not with casual curiosity. There was an intensity to his gaze, a subtle tension in his jaw, as if he were searching for something specific, something vital. Sarah refilled his water glass, brought him the check, and he barely acknowledged her presence, lost in his own private world. She felt a growing prickle of unease, a familiar gut feeling that something wasn't quite right, but she dismissed it, attributing it to her persistent exhaustion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he raised a hand. "Check, please." Sarah, grateful for the impending end of his quiet, unsettling presence, quickly presented the small slip of paper. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out a thick wad of cash that made her eyes widen almost imperceptibly. It was a stack of crisp $100 bills, neatly banded. He peeled off several, far more than the modest cost of his coffee and toast, and placed them deliberately on the table. "Keep the change," he said, his voice still low, almost a murmur, but this time, his eyes met hers for a fleeting moment. In that shared glance, Sarah felt an inexplicable jolt, a silent communication that seemed to pass between them, too quick to decipher. Then, with a strange, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist, so subtle she almost missed it, He slipped something else onto the table, pushing it beneath the stack of bills. It was a smooth, effortless motion, barely a ripple in the fabric of his expensive suit. He stood then, his chair scraping softly against the floor, and without another word, turned and walked out of the diner, leaving behind a faint, lingering scent of expensive cologne. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the stack of money. Her mind, usually so quick to calculate tips and change, felt strangely blank. This was excessive. Far, far more than anyone had ever left. Her heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. She glanced around the now empty diner, then cautiously, her hand trembling slightly, reached for the money. As her fingers brushed the crisp bills, she felt something hard and cool underneath. She carefully lifted the money. And then she saw it. Glinting in the harsh, uncompromising light of the diner's fluorescent tubes, nestled beneath the pile of hundreds, was a diamond. Not a small, decorative stone, but a truly enormous one, the size of a robin's egg. It caught the light, refracting it into 1,000 tiny, dazzling pinpricks of pure fire. $10,000. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a tip. This was a miracle. The dream of art school, the looming eviction notice, the endless, suffocating worry about money. For a precious, dizzying moment, they all vanished. She carefully, almost reverently, picked up the diamond, then the bills, tucking them deep into the secure, zippered pocket of her apron, a sudden, heavy warmth against her thigh. Her pulse, a frantic bird, still thrummed in her ears, louder than the hum of the lights. Sarah's hand, usually steady, trembled visibly as she picked up the diamond. It felt impossibly heavy, cool and smooth against her fingertips, a stark contrast to the flimsy paper bills. $10,000. Her mind, still reeling from the sudden departure of the impeccably dressed man, struggled to reconcile the sheer absurdity of the situation. She counted the bills again, her fingers tracing the crisp edges, confirming the impossible sum. This wasn't just a tip. It was a seismic shift, a miracle dropped right into the weary, mundane rhythm of her life. For a brief, intoxicating moment, the suffocating weight of her reality lifted. The dream of art school, which had long felt like a cruel joke, flickered into vivid possibility. The looming eviction notice receded. The endless, gnawing worry about how she would ever escape the cycle of barely making ends meet. It vanished, replaced by a dizzying rush of pure, unadulterated hope. She quickly, almost instinctively, tucked the money and the diamond deep into the secure, zippered pocket of her apron, a sudden, unfamiliar warmth against her thigh. Her pulse, a frantic drumbeat, still thrummed in her ears. Just then, Mark, her grizzled co-worker, ambled over. Mark was a man carved from years of diner life, gruff, perpetually smelling faintly of coffee and stale cigarettes, but with a surprising well of kindness hidden beneath his weathered exterior. He stopped beside her, wiping down the counter. "Everything all right, Sarah?" he grunted. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Or hit the lottery." He chuckled dryly. Sarah just shook her head, unable to articulate the seismic shift. "Just a really good tip," she managed, her voice a little too high, a little too breathless. She forced a casual smile, hoping it masked the sheer, overwhelming disbelief. Mark just shrugged, his attention already drifting to a new customer. Sarah mentally replayed the man's entrance, his distant gaze, the inexplicable flicker in his blue eyes. And then, the almost imperceptible flick of his wrist. It had been so deliberate, so precise. This wasn't accidental. But why? The rest of her shift was a blur. She moved through the motions, a phantom limb serving customers, refilling coffee cups, wiping down tables. Her movements were automatic, but her mind was fixated, consumed by the impossible fortune hidden deep in her apron pocket. The diamond felt like a hot coal against her thigh, a burning secret that threatened to consume her. It was a tangible weight, a constant reminder of the incredible, terrifying gift. Should she tell someone? Mark, perhaps. Or should she go straight to Mr. Henderson, the diner's owner and manager? Mr. Henderson was notoriously strict but fair. He'd likely be suspicious, demand an explanation, perhaps even suggest turning it over to the police. The thought sent a jolt of anxiety through her. Doubt gnawed at her, a persistent, unwelcome companion. This was too good to be true. Things like this didn't happen to Sarah Jenkins, the struggling waitress from Horizon West, Florida. Miracles, especially ones involving $10,000 diamonds, belonged in movies, not in the mundane reality of the daily grind. A dark, insidious voice whispered in the back of her mind, "What if it's stolen? What if it's bait?" She pushed the thought away, trying to focus on the pleasant, dizzying sensation of possibility. Art school. A new car. Finally catching up on rent. The simple, unimaginable luxury of not constantly worrying about money. As the clock on the wall above the pass-through crept towards closing time, the diner slowly emptied. The clatter of Mark cleaning the grill was the only sound now. Sarah's stomach churned, a mix of excitement and growing apprehension. She felt exposed, as if the secret wealth in her pocket was radiating outward. When her shift finally ended, she practically bolted for the time clock, her hands shaking slightly as she punched out. "See ya tomorrow, Sarah," Mark called out, not looking up. "Don't spend it all in one place," he added with a wink, oblivious to the true meaning behind his words. She offered a weak smile, grabbed her worn messenger bag, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The chill bit at her skin, but it was the icy grip of suspicion, not the weather, that made her shiver. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the parking lot, making the familiar landscape feel alien and unsettling. She fumbled for her car keys, her hands clumsy, and finally unlocked the driver's side door of the coffin. The engine coughed to life with its usual reluctant groan, a sound that ordinarily filled her with dread, but tonight it barely registered. She had to get home. She had to process this impossible gift, to make sense of the man, the money, the diamond. The weight in her pocket felt different now, not just the exhilarating weight of unexpected riches, but the terrifying burden of a secret. What did it mean? Why her? The questions swirled in her mind, a chaotic maelstrom. She clutched her worn bag close, the unexpected treasure both a blessing and a growing source of dread. As she drove away from the diner, the red neon sign of "The Daily Grind" shrinking in her rearview mirror, she couldn't shake the chilling feeling that her life, as she knew it, had just irrevocably changed. The morning dawned with a deceptive, almost mocking tranquility. Sunlight, usually a welcome sight, felt like an unwelcome glare through Sarah's flimsy apartment blinds. She had barely slept, the diamond's unsettling weight a constant presence in her thoughts, even when hidden beneath a stack of old t-shirts in her dresser drawer. Every rustle of leaves outside, every distant car horn, seemed amplified, pulling her from the cusp of sleep. She'd spent the pre-dawn hours pacing her small living room, the smooth, cool stone of the diamond clutched in her palm, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities and terrifying uncertainties. Should she go to the police? The thought sent a jolt of fear through her. What if they thought she stole it? What if the man who gave it to her was involved in something illegal? The sheer value of the gem screamed danger, not generosity. She decided to wait, to think, to let the miracle sink in before making any rash decisions. Perhaps it was a test, a strange, anonymous act of kindness. She wanted to believe that more than anything. Just as the first rays of full morning light finally pierced the flimsy curtains, a frantic, insistent pounding erupted from her apartment door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a demand, sharp and impatient, rattling the thin wood frame. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat, a sudden, cold terror gripping her. She froze, clutching the diamond, now just a few feet away in her drawer. Who could it be? No one ever visited her without calling first. With a trembling hand, she peered through the peephole. Her breath hitched. Standing on her cramped landing were two figures that instantly solidified her worst fears. There was Mr. Henderson, the diner owner, his usually stern but composed face contorted with an unfamiliar mix of anger and grim determination. And beside him, radiating an aura of cold, official authority, was a uniformed police officer. The sight sent a wave of nausea washing over her. Dread, absolute and chilling, settled in her gut. She had been found out. But found out for what? She hadn't done anything wrong. Slowly, reluctantly, she unlatched the multiple locks on her door, her movements stiff, almost robotic. She pulled it open just enough to see their faces clearly, her voice barely a whisper, thin and reedy with fear. "Mr. Henderson, officer." Mr. Henderson didn't mince words. His voice was clipped, devoid of his usual gruff pleasantries, replaced by a cutting sharpness that felt like a physical blow. "Sarah, there's been a serious accusation. A very valuable item was reported stolen from the diner last night, right after your shift. A diamond, to be precise." His eyes, usually assessing and watchful, now burned with a cold, accusing fire. He didn't look at her with concern, but with suspicion. The officer, a tall, imposing man with a grim, unreadable expression, stepped forward. He held up a small, clear plastic bag, and inside it, a single blurry still image from a security camera. Sarah's eyes fixated on the image. It showed her back to the camera, standing at the counter where the man had sat. Her arm was extended, and it undeniably looked like she was sweeping something off the counter and into her hand, moments after the mysterious man had left. The angle, the grainy quality, it was ambiguous enough to be misinterpreted, but damning enough to create an immediate presumption of guilt. "We have security footage, Ms. Jenkins," the officer stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, a tone that sealed her fate more effectively than any shouted accusation. "It appears to show you taking the item." "He didn't ask," he stated. The implication was clear. Sarah's blood ran cold, a glacial current rushing through her veins. The image, though grainy and unclear, was undeniably her. It looked exactly like what they were claiming. Her mind reeled, frantically trying to reconcile the generous, miraculous tip with this damning, irrefutable evidence. The diamond, still hidden in her dresser drawer, suddenly felt like a weapon, heavy and dangerous, pointed directly at her. "No, I didn't steal anything," she protested, her voice rising in desperation, cracking with the effort to make herself heard, to make them understand. Her hands clenched into fists, futile against the tide of accusation. "The man, he gave it to me. He left it as a tip. With the money." She gestured wildly, trying to convey the unbelievable truth. "He said, 'Keep the change,' and the diamond was with the cash." Mr. Henderson scoffed, a short, disbelieving sound that cut through her frantic explanation. Disbelief was etched onto every line of his face, deepening the furrows around his mouth. "A diamond as a tip, Sarah," he said, his voice laced with heavy sarcasm. "That's quite a story. We're talking about something worth tens of thousands, perhaps even more. No one tips that kind of money for coffee and toast." His tone implied she was not just a thief, but a ridiculous liar. The officer's gaze hardened, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't seem interested in her explanation, only in the objective facts of the footage and the report. "We'll need you to come down to the station for questioning, Ms. Jenkins. And we'll need that diamond." His words were an order, not a request. The world tilted. The sudden, exhilarating rush of hope she'd felt hours earlier evaporated, replaced by a sickening plunge into a dark abyss. The miracle had transformed, within a single terrifying knock, into an inescapable nightmare. She was accused, she was cornered, and the very thing that promised to change her life for the better was now the instrument of her potential downfall. Her hands, still trembling, slowly dropped to her sides. The fight seemed to drain out of her, leaving behind only a hollow, echoing fear. The ride to the precinct was a blur of flashing lights and muted street sounds, a surreal, disorienting journey. Sarah sat in the back of the police cruiser, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Each turn felt like a deliberate movement towards an inevitable, crushing fate. The air in the car was heavy with unspoken accusation, a stark contrast to the casual chatter of a diner. Her mind raced, desperately trying to construct a coherent narrative from the chaotic jumble of events. How could something so miraculous turn so swiftly into a nightmare? The diamond, the very object that promised freedom, was now a lead weight dragging her down. At the precinct, the interrogation room was exactly as she'd imagined from countless crime dramas: stark, utilitarian, and utterly claustrophobic. A single metal table stood in the center, flanked by 2 chairs. The walls were bare, a muted beige that seemed to absorb any warmth or hope. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the unspoken weight of suspicion. It pressed in on her, making it hard to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened, and a man entered. This was Detective Miller, a seasoned veteran whose weary eyes seemed to have seen too much of the world's ugliness. His face was a roadmap of quiet cynicism, etched with lines of exhaustion and years of deciphering human deceit. He wasn't aggressive, but his calm, methodical demeanor was far more unnerving than any shouted accusation. He placed a small recorder on the table, clicked it on, and began. "Ms. Jenkins," he started, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, "let's go over this again. He listened patiently, almost too patiently, as Sarah recounted her story. The words tumbled out in a desperate torrent, a frantic attempt to lay bare the impossible truth. She described the mysterious customer, his impeccable suit, his distant gaze, the brief, intense eye contact. She relived the moment he'd placed the thick wad of cash on the table, the strange, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist. She described her shock, her disbelief, her dawning realization of the diamond's impossible presence under the bills. Her confusion, her elation, her decision to keep the gift. Every detail, every emotion, poured out of her. Detective Miller jotted notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen scratching rhythmically, his expression utterly unreadable. He offered no sign of belief or disbelief, just a silent, unwavering focus. When she finally finished, breathless and emotionally drained, he leaned back in his chair. "So," he began, his tone calm, almost conversational, yet laced with an undeniable skepticism, "you're claiming a stranger just handed you a $10,000 diamond as a tip for coffee and toast? Not a ring, not a necklace, just a loose diamond." Sarah nodded, her eyes pleading, desperate for him to see the truth. "It was with the money," he said, "keep the change." It was just there. The detective leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Ms. Jenkins, the man who was at the diner last night, a Mr. Arthur Vance, reported a theft. He's a reputable businessman, well known in the city's antique and art circles. He claims he accidentally dropped a very valuable family heirloom, a diamond pendant, not a loose stone, mind you, while getting his money out. He says it disappeared shortly after you cleared his table. He even identified you from the security footage." Sarah felt a jolt of recognition at the name, Arthur Vance. The quiet man with the distant gaze. A reputable businessman. Her blood ran cold. He was lying. She knew it. Her gut, that same instinct that had pricked her at the diner, screamed it. "No, that's not what happened. He gave it to me. He didn't drop it by accident," she insisted, her voice rising in desperation. "He was looking around the diner, like he was waiting for someone. He barely touched his food." But the detective simply raised a hand, stopping her. "Mr. Vance is a collector, Ms. Jenkins. He visits various establishments. His story is straightforward. Your story, however." He let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished, its implication chilling. "We spoke to Mr. Henderson. He says you're a good worker, but admits the footage is clear. We also spoke to your co-worker, Mark. He confirmed you seemed off that night, excited about something. He even mentioned you looked like you'd won the lottery. Doesn't that sound consistent with finding a diamond?" Sarah felt a wave of despair wash over her. Even Mark, her gruff but kind ally, had inadvertently contributed to the narrative against her. The truth felt like quicksand, slipping further and further away with every word. She was caught in a tightening net, woven from circumstantial evidence and a convenient lie. Why was Arthur Vance lying? What was his motive? What kind of reputable businessman accidentally drops a $10,000 diamond and then pins it on an unsuspecting waitress? It made no sense, unless there was more to it. But the more she tried to explain, the more fantastical her own story sounded. As the hours dragged on, the interrogation continued, a relentless chipping away at her resolve. Detective Miller didn't shout. He merely repeated his questions, rephrased his observations, always circling back to the damning footage and Arthur Vance's seemingly credible account. Each time Sarah offered a new detail about Vance's strange behavior, it was met with a polite but firm dismissal. Doubt began to creep in, insidious and cold. Could she have imagined the flick of the wrist? Could she have misinterpreted his gaze? No. She knew what she had seen. But how could she prove it against a man who was reputable and had the undeniable weight of security footage on his side? The room felt colder, the silence heavier. Sarah imagined her life dissolving, her job gone, her dream of art school crushed, her future replaced by a criminal record. She felt trapped, utterly alone, caught in a web of lies she couldn't untangle. The miracle had become a curse, and she was utterly powerless to stop its destructive unraveling. The fluorescent lights of the precinct felt like a physical weight on Sarah's shoulders as she was finally released. The bitter taste of accusation still lingered in her mouth. She owed her temporary freedom to Mark, her gruff but unexpectedly generous co-worker. He had dipped into his meager life savings, a rainy day fund he'd squirreled away for his ailing mother, to poster bail. The sheer weight of his faith in her, a belief she herself was struggling to maintain, was a heavy cloak draped over her already weary spirit. "Just pay me back when you can, kid," he'd mumbled, avoiding her grateful gaze. "You're a good egg. Don't let 'em break ya." His words were a lifeline in the suffocating darkness of the past hours. Stepping out into the oppressive humidity of a Horizon West afternoon, Sarah felt a new kind of desperation settle in. The world outside the precinct was indifferent, cars rushing by, people going about their lives, utterly unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in hers. She couldn't just sit back and wait for the legal wheels to grind her into dust. She had to fight. She had to prove her innocence, not just to the police, but to herself. The diamond, now safely locked away as evidence, felt like a phantom limb, its absence a constant ache. Her first desperate pilgrimage was back to the daily grind. The diner, usually a place of comfort and routine, now felt tainted, a stage for her public humiliation. Mr. Henderson, though he had vouched for her character, still regarded her with a wary, distant expression. The lingering accusations hung in the air, a thick, unspoken cloud. "You're cleared to come back to work, Sarah," he stated, his voice stiff. "But this is a serious matter. We'll see how it plays out." It was far from an endorsement. Sarah nodded, her gaze sweeping the familiar layout. "Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice carefully steady despite the tremor in her hands, Could I just look at the security footage again? From that night? Please." He hesitated, clearly reluctant, but perhaps swayed by a lingering thread of loyalty, or simply the desire for the truth. He led her to a small, cluttered office in the back, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and dust, and pulled up the footage on a grainy monitor. The clip the police had shown her was damning, her back to the camera, sweeping something from the counter. It was irrefutable, or so it seemed. But what about the minutes before? What about the minutes after? Sarah leaned forward, her eyes straining, her mind intensely focused, as she painstakingly reviewed every second of the night in question. She fast-forwarded through her own mundane movements, through the empty periods, until she reached the crucial window of time surrounding Arthur Vance's arrival and departure. She watched Vance enter, his controlled movements, his almost imperceptible scan of the diner. Her gut clenched. He wasn't just looking for a table. She slowed the footage to a crawl. And then, a detail emerged, something her tired mind had dismissed that night. Just before Arthur Vance had walked in, a woman in a distinctive, vibrant red coat had been sitting at the very booth Vance later occupied. Sarah remembered her. She'd been there for perhaps 15 minutes, nursing a single cup of tea, constantly checking her watch, her gaze darting towards the door with an agitated impatience. She'd seemed to be waiting for someone, her body language radiating a restless energy. She had left just minutes, perhaps mere seconds, before Vance had entered and slid into her still warm seat. Sarah's breath hitched. A jolt, like an electric current, shot through her. It wasn't a random thought, it was a connection, a faint thread in a tangled web. Vance's distant gaze, his scanning of the diner. He wasn't searching for a dropped diamond. He was looking for her. The woman in the red coat. The pieces, disjointed and scattered until now, slowly began to assemble in her mind with terrifying precision. The diamond wasn't a deliberate drop that he accidentally lost. It was a deliberate drop, but for someone else. The woman in red. Was it a planned exchange? A handoff? And Sarah, innocent, overworked, and exhausted, had unwittingly become the unwitting recipient of a secret transaction. A cold dread settled in, deeper than her fear of being arrested. This wasn't about a random act of generosity that went wrong, or even a simple theft. This was far more intricate, more dangerous. It involved deception, a calculated setup. Her initial rush of bewildered hope had been replaced by a chilling clarity. She had become an unwitting pawn in a high-stakes game. The realization brought a surge of adrenaline, cutting through her fatigue. She had a new lead, a new target for her investigation, a single, vital clue, the woman in the red coat. Her anonymity was her shield, but Sarah was an artist. She had seen her face, and now she would find her. Armed with the ghost of a face in her mind and a burning resolve in her gut, Sarah embarked on a desperate, self-appointed investigation. The police, she knew, wouldn't entertain her burgeoning conspiracy theory. To them, she was a waitress caught on camera. Her only hope lay in finding the woman in the red coat, the silent key to unlocking her nightmare. Sarah's artistic skills, once a comforting escape, now became her most potent weapon. She spent hours hunched over her sketchbook, meticulously recreating the woman's face from memory. Every angle, every subtle curve of her jaw, the way her hair framed her face. Sarah sketched them all, driven by an urgency that transcended artistic passion. She drew her with an agitated expression, constantly checking her imaginary watch, trying to capture the restless energy she remembered from the diner. Her first thought was to circulate the sketch discreetly. She knew a few other waitresses in neighboring diners, women who understood the unspoken network of information that flowed between service industry workers. She visited other greasy spoons and coffee shops in the area, the aroma of stale grease and burnt coffee a familiar comfort in her unsettling new reality. She approached her peers cautiously, showing the sketch, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Hey, have you seen this woman? She was at my diner the other day, seemed kind of important." Most people dismissed her, too busy with their own tables, their own worries. A few glanced at the sketch, offered a polite nope, and turned away. The endless stream of blank faces and weary shrugs was disheartening, a slow drip of failure that threatened to extinguish her fragile hope. But then, at Betty's diner, a place even grittier and more worn than the daily grind, a glimmer appeared. The waitress there, a no-nonsense woman with a permanent scowl and a surprising kindness in her eyes named Loretta, took a longer look at Sarah's drawing. Loretta squinted, her gaze sharp. "Yeah, she comes in sometimes," Loretta grunted, her voice raspy from years of shouting orders over sizzling grills. "Always meets a different guy. They talk quiet, intense-like they're plotting something." Sarah's heart leaped. "Did you notice anything else about her? Anything distinctive?" she pressed, barely containing her excitement. Loretta paused, tapping a pen against her teeth. Yeah. She's got this weird little tattoo on her wrist. A bird. Looks like one of those fancy ones, not like a regular pigeon. A tattoo. A small, stylized bird. Sarah's mind flashed back to that day at the daily grind. In the chaotic blur of the diner, her artist's eye, always subconsciously observing details, had indeed registered a faint, dark mark on the woman's left wrist as she'd reached for her teacup. It was a tiny detail, but now it was a crucial piece of the puzzle. This was a breakthrough. The woman in red wasn't just a fleeting face, she had a unique identifier. Sarah thanked Loretta profusely, her hope reignited. The internet. That was the next step. She returned to her apartment, the silence of the empty rooms a stark contrast to the buzzing possibilities in her head. She typed "stylized bird tattoo" into a search engine, scrolling through countless images of ink, from tribal designs to elaborate sleeves. Nothing matched. She refined her search, adding "red coat, diner, Florida." Still nothing concrete. Frustration mounted, a heavy weight pressing on her chest. She was so close, yet so far. Then, a thought struck her. Arthur Vance was a reputable businessman, a collector of antiques. What if the diamond wasn't just any diamond? What if it was famous? She started searching for stolen diamonds, famous diamond heists, private art collections, Florida. The rabbit hole of online research was deep and winding, filled with sensational headlines and dead ends. Hours bled into days. Sarah neglected her art, her sleep, her few remaining social connections. She lived on instant coffee and the desperate fuel of her investigation. Her apartment became a war room, littered with printouts, scribbled notes, and crumpled sketches. She was running out of time, and out of money for bail. Finally, late one night, bleary-eyed and on the verge of giving up, she stumbled upon an obscure online forum. It was dedicated to antique jewelry collectors, specifically those interested in rare, historical pieces with documented provenance. Hesitantly, she created an anonymous account, Truth Seeker. She posted her sketch, mentioning the tattoo, and described the diamond as vaguely as possible. A large, unique, colorless stone, possibly from an older collection, recently cited in an unusual context. She held her breath, hitting post. Within hours, a reply came. A user, GemHunter77, a seemingly knowledgeable individual, responded. "Sounds like the Nightingale's tear. reported stolen years ago from a private collection in Europe, believed to be smuggled into the States. Associated with the notorious art forger, Elias Thorne, and his network. Thorne's group specializes in acquiring and fencing high-value stolen art and jewels. They're known for using dead drops, seemingly innocuous exchanges where valuable items are secretly transferred between couriers. Sarah's breath hitched. Elias Thorne. The name resonated with a chilling familiarity. He was infamous in the art world, a ghost whispered about in hushed tones, a master forger and fence responsible for some of the biggest unsolved art heists of the decade. The Nightingale's Tear. The name itself felt like a whisper of danger. The puzzle pieces, which had been so stubbornly disparate, now slammed together with terrifying precision. The diamond wasn't a random tip, it was the Nightingale's Tear. Arthur Vance wasn't just a customer. He was a courier, part of Thorne's network. The woman in the red coat with the bird tattoo was his contact, part of a dead drop. And she, Sarah, the struggling waitress, had unwittingly become a pawn in a high-stakes, international game of stolen art and dangerous criminals. The sheer scale of it dwarfed her personal troubles, yet it was precisely her personal troubles that had dragged her into its orbit. The initial surge of hope had curdled into a cold, terrifying certainty. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about surviving a hidden war she hadn't known she was fighting. She had found her connection, but it was far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The name Elias Thorne hung in the air, a chilling whisper that permeated the confines of Sarah's small apartment. It wasn't just a name, it was a ghost story whispered in the art world, a legend of forgery, theft, and untouchable networks. The Nightingale's Tear, a diamond of such fabled history, now felt like a curse, its glittering beauty a bait that had dragged her into a shadowy war she never knew existed. Sarah knew she couldn't go to the police yet. They had barely believed her simple truth about the tip, let alone a convoluted tale involving a notorious art fence, dead drops, and stolen heirlooms. She needed proof, undeniable evidence that would force them to see beyond the damning security footage. Her future, her freedom, depended on it. Driven by a desperate, cold resolve, Sarah plunged deeper into the rabbit hole. She cross-referenced Elias Thorne with names she'd gleaned from the online jewelry forum, searching for any associates, any known hideouts, any whispers in the digital underworld. She stayed awake for what felt like days, fueled by stale coffee and raw adrenaline, her laptop screen a glowing portal into a dangerous reality. Her searches led her down obscure news archives, true crime blogs, and even art history forums discussing Thorne's suspected forgeries. She pieced together a mosaic of fragmented information, building a picture of his ruthless operation. Her path, circuitous and nerve-wracking, finally converged on a specific location, a secluded, dilapidated warehouse on the industrial outskirts of Horizon West, Florida. It was a place whispered about in hushed tones online, a known hub for illicit dealings, a place where things disappeared or changed hands for Thorne's less savory transactions. Its address, once just a random string of numbers, now burned in her mind. This was it. This was where she would find her answers. The drive there was agonizingly slow, each mile a tightening knot in her stomach. The setting sun cast long, eerie shadows across the abandoned industrial park. Rusting corrugated metal buildings stood like decaying sentinels, their windows dark and vacant, reflecting the last slivers of daylight. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic tang of decay and the scent of stagnant water from nearby canals. Sarah parked her wheezing sedan several blocks away, under the cover of overgrown trees, and approached on foot. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of fear and resolve. This was incredibly risky, reckless even. But she had no other choice. It was this, or let herself be swallowed by a lie. The warehouse itself loomed, a monstrous, silent shadow against the fading light. Its massive loading bay doors were chained shut, but a smaller, rusted side door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting intrusion. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the cold metal. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to call the police, to hide. But the memory of Detective Miller's skeptical eyes, Mr. Henderson's accusation, and Mark's sacrificed savings pushed her forward. She slipped inside, the sound of her own breathing impossibly loud in the cavernous silence. The air inside was thick with dust, heavy with a faint, cloying scent of chemicals. Paint thinner, perhaps, or something more sinister. Shafts of dying light filtered through grimy skylights, illuminating swirling motes of dust and casting distorted patterns on the concrete floor. The vast space was filled with looming shapes, stacked crates, tarpaulin-draped machinery, and shadowy recesses that seemed to swallow the light. Sarah moved cautiously, her sneakers whispering against the gritty floor, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow, every nerve ending screaming. Then, she heard voices. Low, sharp, and unmistakably angry. They emanated from a dimly lit area deeper within the warehouse, partially obscured by a towering stack of wooden pallets. Sarah crept closer, her breath held, her body pressed against the cold metal of machinery. She found them. Arthur Vance, the impeccably dressed man from the diner, stood facing a woman. And it was her. The woman in the vibrant red coat, now looking even more striking, her face etched with a furious impatience. Sarah recognized the subtle, stylized bird tattoo on her wrist as she gestured wildly. This was Anya, Thorne's right-hand woman, the contact Vance was supposed to meet. They were arguing, their voices sharp and low, a dangerous undercurrent of desperation in every word. The drop went sideways, Vance. Anya hissed, pacing like a caged predator, her red coat a blur of motion. The nightingale's tear is gone. Thorne is furious. Do you have any idea what this means for us? Vance slammed his fist on a rickety metal table, a dull clang echoing through the cavernous space. It was supposed to be a clean exchange. She was supposed to pick it up, not some damn waitress. You were late, Anya. You were late. Sarah, hidden behind a stack of crates, her heart pounding so hard she thought they might hear it, felt a cold dread settle in, colder and deeper than any fear she'd known. She was right. This was a setup. A dead drop gone wrong. And she, the unwitting recipient, was the problem. Vance's confession, Anya's fury, it was all confirming her wildest, most terrifying suspicions. She had the proof. But then, Anya pulled something from inside her coat. It was a small, silenced pistol. It glinted ominously in the dim light. Thorne's orders, Anya snarled, her voice losing its edge of fury, replacing it with a chilling, professional calm. No loose ends. Especially not one who knows too much. And that includes you, Vance. You messed up. Big time. Vance's eyes widened in raw fear. He took an involuntary step back, stumbling over his own feet. Anya, wait. We can fix this. Thorne needs me. Anya ignored him. Her face was cold, her movements precise. She raised the gun, her arm steady, aiming directly at Vance. The room crackled with an unbearable tension, a palpable sense of impending violence. The fate of the diamond, Vance's life, and Sarah herself, all hung precariously in the balance. Sarah knew she had to act. There was no time to think, only to react. With a surge of adrenaline that wiped away all fear, she burst from her hiding spot, yelling, "Stop!" at the top of her lungs. Both Vance and Anya spun around, startled, their heads snapping towards her. Anya's eyes narrowed, instantly recognizing Sarah. Her lips curled into a vicious snarl. "The waitress," she breathed, the gun now swiveling, its silenced barrel pointing directly at Sarah. The game was over. The truth was out. And Sarah was squarely in the crosshairs. The deafening wail of sirens pierced the oppressive silence of the warehouse, growing louder with terrifying speed. Sarah, still reeling from the shock of confronting Anya and Vance, could only stare, wide-eyed, as the outside world, in the form of flashing blue and red lights, converged on their perilous standoff. In her desperate split-second decision to expose Anya, Sarah had noticed a small, innocuous-looking box near the entrance, subtly marked with a tiny red button and the words, "Silent Alarm." It was a desperate gamble, a Hail Mary pass in a game she was clearly outmatched in, but it had paid off. Anya, caught off guard by Sarah's sudden appearance and the escalating sirens, hesitated for a crucial second. Her focus, split between Sarah and the approaching law enforcement, faltered. That split second was all Arthur Vance needed. Seeing his own life on the line, a primal fear overriding any lingering loyalty to Thorne, he lunged. With a guttural cry, he tackled Anya, sending her sprawling across the gritty concrete floor. The silenced pistol skittered from her grasp, sliding with a metallic clatter into the shadowy recesses beneath a stack of crates. Just as Anya let out a frustrated snarl and tried to recover, the warehouse doors burst open. Uniformed officers swarmed in, weapons drawn, their voices shouting commands that echoed through the cavernous space. Leading the charge, his face a mask of bewildered surprise, was Detective Miller. His eyes, usually so cynical and unreadable, widened as he took in the scene. The notorious Thorne associate, Anya, struggling on the floor with a now subdued Arthur Vance, and standing amidst the chaos, pale but defiant, was Sarah Jenkins, the waitress he'd almost accused. "Freeze! Police! Hands where I can see them!" The commands were crisp, authoritative. Anya, seeing the futility of resistance, let out a frustrated grunt and allowed herself to be cuffed. Vance, surprisingly compliant, offered no struggle. The Nightingale's tear, which Anya had concealed in a hidden pocket, was quickly recovered, its dazzling brilliance a stark contrast to the grim surroundings. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was entirely different. The interrogation rooms, once places of dread for Sarah, now held Vance and Anya. Their confessions, once they realized the extent of the evidence and the futility of holding out, began to unravel the full, intricate story. Arthur Vance, as Sarah had suspected, was indeed a low-level courier for Thorne, tasked with exchanging the stolen Nightingale's tear with Anya in a discreet, dead drop at the Daily Grind. The diamond was a recent acquisition for Thorne, destined for a new, illicit buyer. In his haste and nervousness, Vance had made a critical error. He was supposed to subtly place the diamond separately for Anya to retrieve, but in a moment of panic, he had pushed it under his large cash tip, intending for Anya to discreetly pick up both the money and the diamond. Sarah, in her exhausted and unsuspecting state, had swept it all up. When Thorne discovered the diamond was gone and his intricate exchange had failed, he was furious. He ordered Vance to report it stolen, knowing the security footage would point directly to Sarah. Thorne believed she was an unsophisticated, unsuspecting patsy who would easily be convicted, diverting attention from his network. Anya, his cunning and ruthless right-hand woman, was sent to tie up loose ends, which included eliminating Vance for his screw-up and retrieving the diamond from Sarah by any means necessary. Sarah's desperate search had inadvertently led her straight into the heart of Thorne's dangerous operation, forcing Anya's hand. As the details emerged, Detective Miller, a man of few emotions, looked genuinely humbled. He sat with Sarah in his office, the grim set of his jaw softened by a flicker of respect. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice tinged with a rare note of apology, "I owe you one. More than one. Your story, it was outlandish. But you were right. You were incredibly brave." He paused, looking at her with new eyes. Most people would have just turned the diamond in, or panicked. You went after the truth. Sarah, cleared of all charges, felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. The Nightingale's tear was destined to be returned to its rightful owners, a testament to justice served. The $10,000, minus a small portion to cover Mark's bail, was hers to keep. It wasn't Thorne's money, it was Vance's guilt-ridden pocket money, a genuine tip he'd left her, albeit one with extraordinarily complicated strings attached. Later, Sarah visited Mark at the diner. He listened, wide-eyed, as she recounted the terrifying climax in the warehouse, the guns, the arrests, the true nature of the diamond. He whistled low. "Well, I'll be. Guess that makes you a bona fide detective, kid." He clapped her on the shoulder. "And you got my bail money back. Told you you were a good egg." Holding the thick stack of bills, a portion of her unexpected fortune, Sarah felt a different kind of weight now. Not the terrifying burden of a secret, but the tangible weight of justice and a renewed sense of purpose. The ordeal had been terrifying, a brush with a world she never knew existed, but it had also ignited something within her. She'd been pushed to her limits, faced danger head-on, and emerged stronger. She'd seen the darkness, but she'd also found her own strength, her own resilience, and a sharp, intuitive mind she never knew she possessed. Art school still beckoned, a vibrant, attainable dream. But now, Sarah knew it wouldn't just be about drawing portraits of strangers or perfecting charcoal techniques. It would be about capturing the nuances of the human spirit, the hidden stories beneath the surface, the unexpected twists life could take. She would paint with a deeper understanding, a richer perspective. Her future was no longer just about survival. It was about creation, about painting a new masterpiece. One where her own story was a vivid tapestry of courage, unexpected turns, and the enduring glimmer of hope in the most unlikely of places. She finally felt truly free. What would you have done in Sarah's place? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. This story of Sarah Jenkins shows just how important trusting your instincts and fighting for the truth really is.